What is happening inside Iran right now during an active ceasefire is not rest. It is not recovery. It is not the behavior of a government that is considering the terms of a peace proposal. It is the systematic, deliberate, and highly organized reconstruction of the precise military infrastructure that the United States and Israel spent billions of dollars and 12 days of sustained aerial bombardment attempting to destroy. Satellite images reviewed by CNN show front-end loaders working around the clock at the entrances to Iran's underground missile bases, scooping rubble from blocked tunnel entrances, loading it into waiting dump trucks, and clearing the path for missile launchers to drive out, fire, and return to reload. While American and Iranian diplomats are technically operating under a ceasefire, while Washington is waiting for Tehran to submit a unified peace proposal, and while the world is watching the diplomatic process with the fragile hope that a deal is within reach, Iran is doing something that no negotiating government does. It is rebuilding its weapons. It is attacking commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz, and it is publicly signaling through its own state media that the undersea internet cables running through the strait, the cables that carry the digital communications of the entire global economy, are a vulnerability that Iran has identified and has not yet chosen to exploit. The question that every government watching this situation needs to answer honestly is not whether Iran wants a deal. The question is what Iran is preparing for if a deal does not arrive on terms it can accept. The satellite images, the ship attacks, and the internet cable warning are not separate stories. They are three simultaneous communications from a single strategic actor. And when you read them together, the message they transmit is one that the carefully managed language of ceasefire diplomacy is not designed to contain. The underground missile bases that Iran constructed over decades of preparation for exactly this kind of conflict are not simply storage facilities. They are complete military ecosystems, built deep beneath Iranian mountains and desert terrain, specifically engineered to absorb an initial wave of American and Israeli strikes, allow the personnel inside to survive, and then be cleared and returned to operational function in time to launch a second wave of attacks. The concept of operations was never a secret. Iranian military commanders described it publicly in the years before this conflict began as a doctrine of strategic patience underground. You absorb the first attack, you dig yourself out, you launch again. What the satellite images now confirm is that the digging out phase is underway at multiple sites simultaneously during a ceasefire that was supposed to be a pause in hostilities, not a window for military reconstitution. At a missile base near Khomeini, front-end loaders are visible atop debris blocking a tunnel entrance, with dump trucks lined up waiting to carry the rubble away. At a second site south of Tabriz, the same pattern repeats. Equipment at a blocked tunnel entrance, trucks queued in a line that speaks to organized, sustained, high-tempo clearance operations. United States intelligence assessments shared with CNN indicate that roughly half of Iran's missile launchers survived the entire American air campaign intact. Many of those surviving launchers are buried underground by the strikes on tunnel entrances, not destroyed, but inaccessible. The clearance operations visible in the satellite imagery are not rebuilding destroyed launchers. They are unlocking launchers that were never eliminated, that survived the most intensive aerial bombardment Iran has ever absorbed, and that are now being returned to operational accessibility, one cleared tunnel entrance at a time. This is a military reality operating beneath the diplomatic surface of every ceasefire extension announcement, every truth social post about unified proposals, and every reference to Iran's fractured leadership. Half of Iran's missile force, by American intelligence's own assessment, is intact and being methodically restored to launch-ready status while the world watches diplomats talk in Islamabad. On the same day that President Trump extended the ceasefire with Iran, announcing that the truce would continue indefinitely until Iran submitted a unified proposal to end the war, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps attacked 3 commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz, seized 2 container vessels, and transferred them to Iranian shores. The IRGC gunboat that approached the first container ship issued no warning before opening fire. The bridge of that vessel sustained heavy damage. The crew survived. The ship did not sink. But the message transmitted by that engagement was not about the ship. It was about the ceasefire itself, and about what the IRGC believes the ceasefire permits. A senior advisor to Iran's parliament speaker described Trump's ceasefire extension as meaning nothing. He said the continuation of the American naval blockade of Iranian ports was no different from bombardment and must be met with a military response. He accused Trump of extending the ceasefire as a ploy to buy time for a surprise strike, and he said that the time for Iran to take the initiative has come. These are not the words of a government that is internally debating whether to submit a peace proposal. They are the words of a government that has concluded the ceasefire framework as currently structured serves American interests at Iranian expense, and that the appropriate response to a ceasefire that allows the United States to blockade Iranian ports while prohibiting Iranian military action is to redefine, through operational action, what the ceasefire actually permits. Iran's position has been stated with complete consistency throughout this conflict. It is impossible for others to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, while Iran cannot export its own oil. The blockade of Iranian ports and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz are, from Tehran's perspective, the same instrument applied in opposite directions. And Iran's response to the American blockade is not diplomatic protest. It is gunboats approaching container ships without warning and opening fire on their bridges while the ceasefire is technically in force. The IRGC still retains, by American intelligence assessment, hundreds if not thousands of small boats and unmanned surface vessels. The naval force responsible for harassing shipping in the Strait of Hormuz has not been destroyed. It has been watching, waiting, and is now demonstrating with increasing frequency and decreasing restraint that it remains fully operational. The third communication from Iran during this ceasefire period is the most strategically significant and the least discussed in Western media. Iran's semi-official state news agency Tasnim published a report during the ceasefire noting that the Strait of Hormuz contains a concentration of undersea internet cables that represent a vulnerable point for the region's digital economy. The report did not include an explicit threat. It did not need to. The timing of its publication, in the middle of a tense military standoff over control of the strait, with the IRGC actively attacking ships and the United States Navy enforcing a blockade of Iranian ports, was a communication that required no explicit statement to be understood by every government, every telecommunications company, and every military planning cell that received it. The undersea cables running through the Strait of Hormuz carry internet traffic for the Gulf states, for large portions of South and Southeast Asia, and for significant volumes of the global financial communications that underpin daily economic activity across dozens of countries. Cutting those cables does not produce a dramatic military explosion visible to satellite cameras. It produces a silent catastrophe that unfolds gradually across every digital system dependent on the communications those cables carry. Financial markets losing connectivity, businesses losing communications, governments losing the digital infrastructure through which modern governance operates. This is not a new concept in modern warfare. Undersea cable cutting has been a documented component of conflict planning by multiple state actors. What makes Iran's signal significant is its precision and its timing. Iran is not threatening to cut cables as a bluff. It is identifying, publicly and in detail, that it knows where the cables are, that it understands their strategic value, and that it has not yet chosen to exercise the option that their location in the Strait of Hormuz makes available to it. Every day that the blockade continues and the ceasefire holds without a diplomatic resolution, that option remains on the table, unexercised, and therefore maximally coercive. The three simultaneous actions being taken by Iran during this ceasefire, rebuilding underground missile infrastructure, attacking commercial ships, and signaling the internet cable vulnerability, are not separate tactical decisions made by different parts of the Iranian government. They are components of a coherent strategic communication directed at Washington, at the Gulf states, at the European governments currently meeting in London to discuss military options for reopening the strait, and at the global audience watching the economic consequences of this conflict compound daily. The communication is this: Iran has survived the most intensive American aerial bombardment directed at any country in the modern era. Half of its missile force is intact and being restored to operational readiness. Its naval forces are still functional and still attacking ships. Its options for escalation include capabilities, the internet cables, that the Western military planning currently focused on minesweeping and freedom of navigation has not fully incorporated into its operational calculations. and its position on the core question driving this conflict has not changed. The blockade of Iranian ports is an act of war. It will be treated as one. No peace proposal will be submitted under conditions of economic siege. Washington is currently operating on the assumption that the economic pressure of the blockade will eventually force Iran to accept terms it has publicly and consistently rejected. That assumption has driven American strategy toward Iran for 4 decades, through sanctions, through maximum pressure campaigns, through military strikes on nuclear facilities, through a 12-day air war that destroyed 2/3 of Iran's acknowledged military production capacity. And the output of 4 decades of that assumption being applied with maximum available pressure is the situation visible today. Half of Iran's missiles are intact. Its naval forces are attacking ships during a ceasefire. Its state media is identifying internet cable vulnerabilities in a strategic waterway it controls. And its senior officials are describing the ceasefire extension as meaningless and the blockade as an act of war that must be met with a military response. The fires of this conflict have not been extinguished by the ceasefire. They have gone underground, into the same tunnels that American bombs blocked, and Iranian front-end loaders are now systematically clearing, one dump truck of rubble at a time, in preparation for whatever comes next. The world is watching a ceasefire that exists in name only, while beneath the surface, beneath the mountains of Iran, beneath the diplomatic language of unified proposals and extended truces, a military machine is being rebuilt, with patience, with discipline, and with the strategic clarity of an adversary that has studied this moment for decades, and is preparing for it with every hour that the blockade continues and the deal does not arrive. The question that Washington, London, and every Gulf capital needs to answer is not whether Iran will negotiate. The question is what Iran will be capable of on the day that negotiation finally fails. The satellite images already have the answer. The dump trucks are still running. The tunnels are being cleared, and the missiles are waiting. If this analysis reached the strategic reality that the institutional narrative is working to contain, share it immediately. Drop your most detailed assessment in the comments below. What do you think Iran is actually preparing for? And how much time does Washington have before the ceasefire becomes something far more dangerous than a diplomatic stalemate? Hit like, subscribe, and stay sharp. The next development in this conflict is already unfolding. We will see you in the next one.